All right, well, thank you for having me here. I appreciate it. Hopefully you'll learn something from this. I'm going to give you a warning. The presentation is pretty dry on the PowerPoint, but I'm going to try to fill it in with actual case experiences, which I did not want to put in writing for fear of being sued or something like that. So that's me. My wife and mother say I look handsome. I disagree, but my primary specialty in the entertainment industry is I do crisis management. I represent production companies, A-list talent. I don't do any studio work. Distribution companies in all sorts of disputes, from studio audits, audits of distributors, copyright infringement, film distribution deals, defamation film rights disputes. So I cover the gambit, and I've done a lot when it comes to film financing. Usually a lot of problems have come up, and I've tried to resolve them and hopefully get the film back on track. So in addition to being a lawyer in the industry, I've also executive produced a few movies, and I actually wrote the Bollywood movie Blue, which I won't discuss because I was kind of embarrassed by it. Moving on. This is just kind of my thinking of the entire process of how to make your independent film. These are the four keys that you really need to have in order to be successful. And every one of the clients I have that are successful in the industry have all of these qualities. Perseverance, never give up. It's complicated, it's irritating, it's frustrating. You're gonna wanna rip your hair out, and you're gonna wanna punch your friends, but you've gotta stick with it. You just gotta keep going forward. Dedication, again, just stick with it. Don't give up, and no matter how many doors are gonna be shut in your face, which they will be, and that's where resilience comes in, you gotta do it. Just keep pushing. If they slam a door in your face, find a window to get through, or go find another door. And then you have to be entrepreneurial. There's no set path here. Experienced producers will tell you, no movie they've done is exactly alike unless you happen to have that billionaire that's willing to give you however much money you want to make your movies. Okay, so this is just my rough thing. There's 6 steps to making an independent film. The first step is creative, the second step is business, financing, publicity, distribution, collection. On the creative side, you have to have material. You have to have a good script, or at least some sort of underlying material that you're going to make your film from. Otherwise, nobody's even going to talk to you about money. And I can't tell you, a lot of you in the room say, oh yeah, that's obvious, but I can't tell you how many times people have called me or one of my clients up and said, hey, I've got a great idea for a movie. Can you give me $5 million for it? And you know, the answer is no. You got to know who your audience is so that you can be prepared to explain to investors, you know, who's going to pay to see this movie. Know the genres, because some genres play better overseas. For a number of years, horror films played much better overseas than your period pieces or your drama movies. And that goes to, again, how am I going to get an investor to invest money in my movie? Be realistic. You'd be surprised at how many people come in and, you know, they're using a Star Wars movie or a Marvel movie for their samples. And I was like, yeah, if you can get $200 million, why are you calling me? And then, you know, kind of brainstorm when you're putting this all together, who's going to be my lead? After you get a script and all that, who can actually play it? And don't, you know, again, don't be unreasonable. Think big, but don't be unreasonable. Don't say, oh, Brad Pitt and George Clooney, because if you could get those guys in your movie, you wouldn't be sitting here right now. So you would be making movies nonstop. But there are a lot of different, you know, quality actors who have a following out there that, you know, many are on TV. You put them in your independent movie, you get them signed up. It's a lot easier to get money if you have somebody like that attached to a movie. So brainstorm some of that. And then even identify filming locations, because sometimes you get, I have a client who was able to get a top European actor because they filmed it in that person's hometown. I can't tell you who because it's still confidential, but they filmed it in that person's hometown, and that was what swung the person to do it. So you never know what weird little thing is going to actually help you get your movie made. The second step is business. This part always seems to be skipped over by the creative people. And as creative as they are, they just they're focused on their project, their passion project, and they just lose sight of it's a business. In order to get your movie made and convince some people to finance your film, You have to have a business plan so that they know what their return on investment is going to be. So you take all of the stuff that you did in creative and you synthesize it down into a business plan or a deck. And that would include, focusing on the return on investment. How are you going to recoup? Where are you going to distribute the movie? What's your publicity and marketing plan? I would recommend that you create 3 different types of budgets. A high budget, be realistic. Again, if it's an independent film, you're not doing a Marvel or Star Wars movie. So, a high budget I would say is 20 million. Mid-range is 5 to 10, and then low budget is anything below 5 million. And I'll tell you, I have a friend, client who's produced over the last 8 years probably 12 independent movies. And the first series of movies he did were $300,000 movies. He got them all in the can. They all turned a profit, knock on wood for him. And now he's doing $20 million movies, and he's got film investors calling him saying, hey, we like this project that this person brought to us, but we have no faith that he can actually deliver, so come in and do it. So sometimes it's getting to the right people as well. So the next step is the big part of this is how to finance your movie. Where do I go? I'm not really going to follow that. So just find what types of movies you are, start making lists of the companies that invested in those movies, and focus on how to get in touch with them. You prepare your business plan, you start trying to make contacts, start going to events like this, go to other film festivals as well. That's a good way to meet people and network. And you got to just find the people who will listen to you. And again, don't be afraid of having doors shut in your face. Keep going. So now these are the traditional financing models: negative pickup deal, equity financing, tax incentives, foreign pre-sales, bank loans, deferred compensation. Negative pickup deal is basically a studio is going to sign a contract that they will give you $25 million for you to produce the movie, and you go off and produce the movie. And that's why it's like they're picking up the negative. That's where the phrase comes from. So good points about this is you get your movie and you can go out to a bank and easily get a loan because the studio's got a contract with you and guaranteeing your movie. Bad points is it's a studio and they're going to, no matter what they say, they're going to have a lot more to say in your own movie and how to produce it and what the story is and who the cast is than you probably really want. So if you really want to be independent, this is a difficult way to go. I have one client who produced Terminator Salvation, and that was actually done as a negative pickup deal, and they were constantly berated by the studio for everything. Also, a negative is if it ever goes over budget, you've got to now go out and do all the other financing models to try to figure out how to get that money and make that up, and you're probably going to be on the hook for it. Equity financing. This is all very dense up there, but really a couple of base points is it's basically you're forming a company and you're bringing in people, shareholders, who buy equity in it, and then you use the money to make the film. The biggest problem I've seen from this situation is that people don't, the filmmaker doesn't understand that now they have obligations to the investors. They owe them fiduciary duties. They have to account for everything they do to the investors. They have to account for every penny they spend of the investors' monies. And they think they can still just go out and do anything they want. I had one of the weirdest experiences in my career was I got a call from a guy who was referred to me by a friend, and his boss invested in a film, and they needed help because the director and producer wouldn't tell them anything that's going on. So the next thing I know, I'm getting picked up in 6 black SUVs by a large group of Nigerian film investors, taken to some hotel. They just really drove up, picked me up right at my office and took me off. And I sat through this meeting over an argument over how much money was spent. And I literally thought it was going to turn into a fist fight, and I was ready to run for the door because the director and the producer did not tell the investor anything about what was going on. There was no reports, there was no nothing. And it actually, oddly enough, it turned out to be that the investor was pissed off that the director made a comment about the investor's wife, and that's what prompted the lawsuits, or the threats of a lawsuit. But the point is, investors are difficult to deal with. And as you raise more and more money in it, you have to deal with more and more investors, and now they're negotiating against each other as much as against you. So the next step is tax incentives. Basically, the government, and we're in Canada, which has very good tax incentives, the government will give you a portion of the budget back if you film in Canada or in the United States. Louisiana has good tax incentives. California is trying to get better. New York is getting better. Oddly enough, I think Michigan has. I'm not a tax expert, so I'm not going to go too into detail of this, but I will again tell you there are pitfalls with this. I had a client who was stuck left holding the bag after a group of investors used the tax incentive structure in Louisiana as a scheme to defraud other investors. And fortunately, I was able to keep him out of jail by basically proving he really wasn't smart enough to do a tax fraud scheme. Foreign pre-sales. It's just, you go out, you take your movie to foreign distributors, and you sell the territory to them for the movie. In my experience, this usually requires either a genre type film, like horror films sell better in Japan, or at least it used to be, or that you have an actor who is attached to the movie that's popular enough to actually get some sort of some interest in the territory that they want the movie. And then you take the money that they give you in pre-sales, and you either go back to the bank to film the movie, or they give you a contract for a pre-sale and you go to a bank and you get the money. Which brings us to the bank loans. You know, bank loans have not been easy to get lately, especially for films, unless you're extremely successful producer. But basically they want collateral, so they'll take it in the form of a contract, like with a negative pickup deal. They'll take it in the form of a contract for pre-selling the movie to certain foreign territories, or you can personally guarantee it, which I've seen people do, which is frankly never a good idea. Because if everything goes bad, which no matter how great you think your independent film is, it's very difficult to turn a profit, you're going to be left holding the bag in that situation. And I've dealt with cases like that drove one person into bankruptcy. He guaranteed what's called a gap loan, where you have $1 million and you need $2 million to finish the movie. So they got that $1 million in a bank loan with this guy who frankly was defrauded the bank about his net worth. And then the film did not turn any profit. Everything that could go wrong with it went wrong with it, including it was a Spanish language film that they released on literally the day Mexico was playing its World Cup game in something, which was all because the investor, and again, don't laugh, the investor said Venus is in retrograde, so it has to, and the numerologist says it has to be released on that day. So yet another thing you're going to have to deal with if you go the route of equity financing, investors' bizarre whims. Deferred compensation. This is basically in your budget, you put compensation in for certain people, directors, producers, director of photography, whoever else, and they defer it until after the movie goes. You know, it helps. You can never do a full movie on deferred compensation, of course, but it is something that helps. I can tell you that this always is a negotiated point. I've had to negotiate many times where they were, you know, the person who said, we all have to take deferrals. Well, his deferral was 10% of his fee, and everybody else's deferral was 95% of their fee, and nobody's going to sign their contracts, and they're all going to hold up production of the movie, and meanwhile they have people and crew flying in to do this. So usually it turns into a nightmare when you start doing this right from the beginning, because nobody wants to do it until they actually realize we don't have enough money to make this movie. So there's a couple new financing models that are being used, crowdfunding, donor-based, and crowdfunding, equity-based. Crowdfunding is basically, you go out to the crowd, whoever's interested in your movie, and you try to make a movie. You try to raise the money from the movie from whoever wants to invest. It's, you know, about 5 years ago, I was on a lot of panels about crowdfunding. I'm actually an angel investor in a crowdfunding portal, but it hasn't quite taken off the way people had hoped. It actually costs a lot of money to do a proper campaign. So usually the average independent filmmaker who just has their pet project, if they don't have a following, if they don't have an actor that has a following that's attached to the project, it's basically a friends and family raise that is what it turns out to be. But you know, there's been some successful donation-based crowdfunding raises. The Veronica Mars movie and Zach Braff's Wish I Was Here, they had a following. They had a set intellectual property that had a fan base already in existence that wanted to see those movies made. So a lot of people were able to contribute. And believe me when I tell you this, they actually spent a lot of money on marketing. So again, crowdfunding costs money to actually do your marketing. It's not just let's put it up and everybody will come to it. You have to go out and social media, the links to it, talk to people, take calls from investors or from donors, and then you have to figure out if it's a donor base, you usually get a gift depending on how much the person donates. If they donate, you know, $10, you get a free movie ticket. If it's $100, you get a DVD. $500, a T-shirt. If you do $10,000 or above, you may get a role in the movie. It's all over the place in that way. Equity-based crowdfunding, just even more so than just taking the money from an investor, equity-based crowdfunding has several regulations that involve this. In the United States, the Securities and Exchange Commission. I don't know if there's a similar commission in Canada that governs stock offerings, but basically you're offering equity in a movie. The advantage to, if you can do a crowdfunding base, like if you can get Ashton Kutcher, who has a big following on Twitter and all social media, if you can get someone like that to be in your movie and you can actually do this, crowdfunding is actually, in my opinion, a better way to get money and more freedom than dealing with individual investors who will come in and make demands. Like, and some of these demands will be very weird. Like, I want executive producer status. I want to be able to take, you know, they'll go to dinner with the lead actors every night, or some of them get really weird the more money they put in, because if you need the money, you have to give up some control, and they will also start dictating to you what they want to see in the movie. I had one client who said he had an investor who's going to pay for the whole movie, $2 million, give him straight out. All he had to do was put the guy's niece in his movie. Well, as I got more into the documents, because the investor used just an LLC from Delaware, so I didn't know who the exact investor was. Found out the investor was some Russian oligarch who had a very sketchy past, and the niece was much more of a mistress than anything else, and she couldn't act at all. So it was just going to destroy the movie anyway, and I frankly didn't want to really do business with someone who actually was associated with various murders. This is my dream. This is an initial coin offering. Everybody's heard of Bitcoin and Ethereum. A lot of companies, instead of doing crowdfunding, are raising money by initial coin offerings, which is they're creating their own cryptocurrency and they're launching it, and then they use the money that they get from selling the currencies to develop their company. I have been in discussions with people to do a film fund that will launch an initial coin offering. It's the whole film, but be creative. You got to use every single one of these strategies. You know, you can do a little bit of each. Get a small amount of equity and then do a crowdfunding raise or donation-based raise so that you don't have to deal with other people. There's no way, there's no plan, there's no silver bullet here for anybody. You just have to that's why I said be entrepreneurial. Be out there trying to structure deals in certain ways. And I know some of you probably came here hoping I would give you how to structure a deal, but every deal that I've worked on has been different. I've done it where there's 5 investors and they all agree how to split the pot, and we do an operating agreement and we're done. And I've done deals right now. I have one that we have 200 different agreements that correlate and cross-collateralize with each other. That is just insane about how to keep track. I have no idea how we're going to actually establish the collection agreement and how the collection company is going to have to pay out with that many agreements, but I'm sure I will bill a lot of hours figuring it out. Also, think beyond just the traditional and what's coming. Like, look at what could happen next. We saw a presentation here about branding. You could possibly, if you can take your film and put it into a branding situation, then you might be able to get sponsorship money from companies. And so there's, again, no one path to financing your independent film. But the one thing that's going to end up happening is you're going to have to give up some semblance of control when you take on investors. They're going to want to say in it, depending on how much money they're investing. Even with crowdfunding, the more that they invest, the more they're going to want to say it. Donation-based, not so much. But to get your movie done, you're going to have to give up some aspect of control, again, unless you know that one billionaire who will give you complete freedom to do whatever you want. And maybe if you murder some people for that Russian guy, he will. This is my particular strategy that I've suggested to people, and it's been successful to a certain degree. The movies haven't come out yet, so I can't tell you whether they will actually be successful or not. But I call it the staged investment strategy. In the startup world, because I don't just do entertainment, I do angel investing in tech companies and other companies. But they have a series investments. So you have the seed round that you use to build your prototype and finalize your patents and technology. Then you have a Series A round where you take that money and go to market, and then you have Series B rounds where you use that money to expand, and hopefully then you can go public or get bought by a bigger company. I took that model and put it into the films, and I say, so you have a script, or if you're just a producer, you need to find money to get a writer to write the script. But let's start with that. So you can do that with crowdfunding. Let's say there's a comic book, a graphic novel series that you want to turn into a movie. You get the small comic book company, because obviously it's not going to be DC or Marvel. So you get the small comic book company, and you get the rights, and they're all on board, and you do a crowdfunding donation-based to raise the money in order to hire a writer to write a script for the series. That's great because it already has a fan base. The comic book company has its network of readers that you can draw from, and you have source material. So then the next phase would be, as I'm looking up, the seed round for the business deck and private placement memo, which I'll talk to you about because I didn't mention earlier. The private placement memo is basically the investment plan and disclosures that you have to make to investors. It lists everything about the movie, about your plan. It also has risk factors. And frankly, in independent filmmaking, the risk factor is you will likely lose most of your money in this because that's independent film. You have to say that even if you think your film's great, and it may be. You better say that, because if you make any promises that don't come true, there's a better than 50% chance the investor will sue you. Because I've seen, even when all the promises were made, that the investors sued over some ridiculous thing. So then you would use your, you would do a family and friends round or a crowdfunding round to do the script and the business plan. And then you would go to Series A, which you would raise the money for either doing a crowdfunding campaign to raise the money, or you could do the Series A to hire a director or a key actor. And a lot of times you can go out and get actors and lock them up on a condition of their schedule, but you'll also have to pay them a holding fee, which would be a percentage of whatever the deal is or whatever they negotiate. And in independent film, it's really more of a passion project if the person is interested. The best way to do it is to find, like I said, a TV actor who wants to do film. Hopefully the TV actor would have a big enough following and is looking to do either a film or a different type of character than they have done in the past. Or getting a young actor with a name that hasn't done anything big. The movie that I executive produced, Dawn Patrol, they had locked up Scott Eastwood for it first, and that was one of his first movies, and now he's doing much bigger movies. And so fortunately for the investors in Dawn Patrol, people are actually buying more of it as Scott Eastwood is getting bigger and bigger. But if you get them young, then you can actually have a longer-term income stream. Then you do a Series B round. You could do that with investors, banks, pre-sales, however, and then that would be your principal photography. And then the Series C investment round is for publicity and marketing, which, while it's not really part of film financing, you have to think about it. You have to think about the whole plan while you are going to raise money. Again, investors only care about return on investment, unless you're lucky enough to have that socially conscious person and your project fits within their wheelhouse. They want to know, how much am I going to put in? What is the likelihood that I'm going to get this back? So, before we get to publicity and marketing, let me go back so we don't read that. I did want to tell you a couple of weird situations that I've been into so you can avoid them. One, in a company that was crowdfunding a film, again, I can't give you the details. They did everything wrong that you could possibly do wrong regarding the regulatory rules with the SEC. So again, I'm going to give a little plug to attorneys out there. You better hire an attorney if you're doing anything like that. Otherwise, you're going to end up like this. And then they get a letter from the SEC, and for those of you who don't know, the SEC governs stock trading in the United States. And then they responded to the SEC with, literally it was something to the effect of, "Dear jackbooted Gestapo thug, you leave us alone and get out of our business." And instantly, of course, they were sued and were prosecuted. And fortunately, we were able to get them out by, again, showing the SEC that they were creative filmmakers and not business people, and that they just made mistakes. And fortunately, they were not shady people and actually had 90% of the money left and were not using it for their own purposes, but actually wanted to make the film. So they were able to return almost all of the money. But again, it's a lesson in, you got to be careful no matter what you're doing. You know, another example is you have to, in filmmaking, you have to keep track of all your documents. It's called chain of title documents. Everything that shows that you have the rights to make that film, whether you do it, you should do it through a special purpose entity. But I had another case where the producer, financier, got into a fight with the director. The director then went in and he took his original directing agreement and walked off with it and destroyed it and made all sorts of copyright claims. Because of that, the movie sat up on the shelf because no distributor would touch it, because the director had all these claims on the copyright, and it was a complete disaster after the investor spent $10 million on it. And the producer was just stuck there with nothing to show for his work. So again, you have to keep track of everything, document everything, account everything to your investors. Okay, publicity and marketing. This is important to film financing because you have to get your movie out there. You have to let people know what it is so you can start to get buzz and word of mouth about why your movie is going to be good, who wants to see it, and how to generate the people who are going to buy tickets so you can get that return on investment for your investors. You know, social media is, of course, the starting place. I would try to put into the budget a sum of money to be used for publicity and marketing. You know, there's all sorts of examples of guerrilla marketing that have happened and been successful, but those are few and far between. So I would do this. In fact, I have personally, I wrote a graphic novel. It's coming out. I've got my own. I'm looking for a publicity person to do that, because you need to do it yourself. You can't rely on the distributor to do it, especially in independent film. The distributor will do some, but if it's a big enough film and a quality enough film, they will do some. But a lot of times they'll do what's called a service deal, where they'll distribute it, but you have to pay for the prints and advertising and do all the marketing. And they're not really going to market it beyond put it up on their own website. But you have to think about this so you can convince an investor that you know what you're doing, that you have a plan. Even if you can't do everything, you still need to be able to show that, to build faith with that investor. So another thing to do is do the circuits on the films, and even if your film's not in one of the festivals, you should go to the festival and talk about your movie. Talk to other people that might have similar movies so that maybe they'll start helping generate buzz on social media. Again, have all of your crew, and make it, any actor that's in your film, make it a requirement that they have to post on social media X number of posts about your movie. even before it's been done, while it's filming, before it's filming, you know, if you get a good enough actor who has any sort of following, you know, have them post about, hey, I just signed a deal. I'm going to be in this independent film, hopefully coming out July 2018 or filming in July 2018, so that it starts some sort of groundswell around your project, because then it's easier to get a distributor. You can even sponsor at an event or something at a film festival. You'll ask the people here, they always like sponsors. And have a screening events. I've seen that. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, so I saw there's always screening events that you can go to for movies that haven't been released, especially independent films. Basically, have a game plan for how you're going to get the movie out there. Then the step 5 is distribution. That's where you actually hire a company that's going to put your movie in the theaters, hopefully, or a video on demand, or streaming deals, all that kind of stuff. There's so many new ways. I was here at a presentation earlier where a guy had a chart about all the new ways to distribute a film. Take advantage of every one of them. Try to get as much money up front, but frankly, in my experience, unless you're like a winner at the Sundance, Cannes, or Berlin or Toronto, it's going to be very tough to get an upfront minimum guarantee on your movie. But you can try and always push for it. But either way, there's getting a distributor is a key thing, because even now, when you could probably distribute your own movie on YouTube and start some channels that way, you're never going to generate that return on investment unless you get a real distributor to distribute your movie. And that includes, you know, there's foreign sales agents who will go out and help you find the distributors in the various territories. And then finally, this is a step that most people forget, that I keep reminding them about, but it's collection. How you actually get the money. You made your movie. You did the publicity. You got the financing. You got the distributor. You go out and you distribute the film. Now, I have a few clients that recently distributed a movie through a company called Our Alchemy LLC, and then July of 2016, Our Alchemy LLC went bankrupt, and they owe $40 million, and they have $20 million of assets. My clients aren't getting anything, and their movies actually made enough money that if the company had stayed in business, it would have recouped. But all that money is pooled with Our Alchemy LLC, and this happens more times than anybody really wants to admit. It also is where a distribution company keeps the money and then pays out over time. Yeah, here's your statement where we owe you $120,000, but here's a check for $5,000. And meanwhile, they're using your money to expand their business or to run the company. You know, I mean, that happens a lot too, and then they pay it out slowly over time. But the key thing is to make sure you are on top of collecting the money. Most filmmakers just kind of like, oh, I produced it, I distributed it, I'm moving on to the next project, and they forget about collection because you're relying on the distributor to actually pay. But in many cases, the distributor does not pay. So that's kind of the final step. Another thing that you always have to keep in mind is everything that I say up here, everything that you guys plan, you've got the perfect plan, be ready to scrap the whole thing, because you have to go where the money is. You know, if you have a plan and here's how I'm gonna do a staged investment, and then some billionaire decides, I really like this script, I love this story, you know, it's based on, I don't know, my favorite comic book series, and you got the rights, I'm gonna give you the money to do it. Drop your whole plans, come up with a new one for that. You know, there's all sorts of ways to do this, and there's all sorts of mistakes to get in that you can get into, but you have to be prepared to be flexible and deal with these things. So that's it for the presentation. I really hope we have time for questions, which is what I really wanted to do, because this type of thing is very fact specific. Doesn't look like any questions. Yeah.
Just a question about chain of title. You talked about like a director who leans on a project or something. If a producer has crossed all the T's and dotted the I's, how do you prevent that just like a crazy person coming out of the woodwork and saying, hey, I own a piece of this, and
Oh,
I thought of it before you.
Well, as I actually have a case where I do have a crazy person who sold his script to a client and they made a movie. And he's come out of the woodwork and he's saying all sorts of crazy things. And I was kind of like, I'm looking at the purchase agreement that he signed. You know, in that situation, the only thing you can do is actually have your chain of title that's fully documented, and that only a few certain people can. Like, the problem with this guy is the chain of title was like over there in a stack. And so the director walked in and literally looked through it and pulled his thing out. It was not in any protected area. And in fact, I told him if it burned down, you would have a problem because you wouldn't have any documents showing this. So the only thing to stop a crazy person is you could preemptively sue them and force their hand to prove that they actually have a piece of the movie, have an interest in the movie. But I usually advise you people to ignore crazy, because engaging crazy only drags you into insanity.
Right, so who does the burden of proof fall on?
It would fall on the crazy person to prove that they have to do it. So basically, you
Okay.
force them to file a lawsuit.
Right, okay. Thanks.
Yep. On an independent film,
I'll
I
give you
haven't.
that question with the mic if you want.
Yeah. On an independent film, I haven't seen too much lately. That was something that happened more, I think, 10 years ago. It can happen, but most banks, frankly, ever since the financial crisis, have been very leery to do any sort of gap financing like that. That's just too risky in this day and age with banking regulators.
I think also the market is so fragmented that from an investor standpoint, from a bank standpoint, is that, you know, you just don't have the same distribution channels you had on the back end.
Yeah, it's much harder to get an independent film widely distributed. Yeah, but like I said, really, unless your movie is an award winner at Cannes, Sundance, Berlin, Toronto, it's guerrilla marketing, it's Netflix, it's Amazon, maybe a small theater run, but it's really going to be dependent on you to have a really good publicity and marketing plan in place that takes advantage of that kind of guerrilla style.
The other issue is you've had some, like, if you look at when Harvey Weinstein was at his, you know, powerful, most, you know, when what he was doing, he was taking a lot of these films and he was able to back end them. He was, you know, he had that clout. You just don't have anybody out there in that, I mean, out in that hemisphere anymore doing that.
No, and even Harvey Weinstein, although if you saw the article today, there's big problems there. But even now they don't have that, which is why the Weinstein Company has been pretty much dependent on Quentin Tarantino for the past few years. Yeah, but Lionsgate also had now, because they bought Summit, they have solid franchises that they can rely on. Right behind you.
When investors agree to invest in your film, is there a typical percentage that they want back? And has that changed in the last few years?
I wouldn't say there's anything typical about that. And if any independent filmmaker agrees to guarantee any specific percentage return on investment, they are opening themselves up for a massive fraud lawsuit. And frankly, if you're an independent filmmaker, you probably are judgment proof because you don't have enough money to actually survive that, but you do not want to go through that. You know, and again, I stress in those situations to use a lawyer. It's not in the entertainment industry, but I had a client who owned nursing homes, and he hired a lawyer who just cut and pasted these basic documents together and gave them to investors on a very complicated investment scheme. I don't want to say scheme because it was legal, but to comply with regulations. And then he got sued because he didn't have any loss, because he didn't have any of the warnings and risks and disclosures in there that he should have. So a lot of times don't really make promises that you aren't 100% sure you can cash. That's why I said in any disclosure to the investors, you should definitely say something to the effect of, this is a very high risk investment and there is every likelihood that you could lose all of your money.
we can talk about this after maybe a bit more if it's too boring for folks, but I'm extremely interested in the ICO model.
Okay.
And I'm curious,
I admit I threw that in there because that's my dream that I've been trying to work on for like a year.
yeah, I've been playing with some similar ideas, so I do look forward to following up with you. I'm curious about it all, but basically, what is that coin, and is it, where does the value come back for people using it? Is it with an existing platform, or is it a whole other new thing?
Well, there's both that's been discussed. Sometimes it's with an existing platform to link it to Ethereum and Bitcoin. And then there's been discussions of trying to create a film fund where, because you're going to run afoul of the SEC if you do it in the way that they actually own a piece of the company through the coin, but they can freely trade the coin because it's a coin and not a security. That's what some people are arguing. I'm a lawyer, and I was like, you don't want to cross that line. Because the SEC is waiting for someone to cross that line so that they can slap them down. So that's why I've kind of held off on it, because of that exact question is what benefit are you getting? I did a coin offering for a client that had online advertising space, but your coin buys space, the right to space on the internet. So, or you can sell it freely and trade it for Bitcoin or whatever, but it does have a utility to it. So that's one of the problems that I've been trying to deal with, is what is the utility for the cryptocurrency that would come up with this film fund? Ideally, if you could get a larger, even a studio involved as a partner in it, then you could give it a utility, because you could try to use it somewhere else with purchasing studios, merchandise or something like that. But no studio is going to risk that kind of new technology. They're too busy screwing talent.
I think if you look at a parallel, the porn industry, what happened to it, and you look at independent film, I think you're kind of sort of heading that way. It's the platform base. If you can have, the free model is going to be the execution.
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibility.
Yeah. But then you got to make the product. But
Right.
that's the chicken and egg situation.
And if you're always going to be distributing it for free or via advertising, it's going to, be very difficult to raise the money you would need to make
Or
quality products.
you're prostituting yourself for paid branded content or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of on the cusp of what to do next. And that's another reason why I specifically referenced the ICO model, because we have to be creative in independent film thinking to come up with that new model. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryan. We really appreciate everything you shared today, and I know we're really looking forward to talking to you in the breaks. I think we actually have time to take a little bit of a coffee break between now and when we're going to start up with Catalina Briseño at 4:40. So take a break,